Cantor's office, but contacts that we've gotten in state government at the staff level. Congressman Cantor's staff has assured us that there's not going to be any delay in funds coming to New Jersey for any reason. And I think that's the way it should be. And I think this is a consistent position. I've said all along, said this during the hurricane, that I think the most important obligation of government is to protect the lives and property of its people. So, you know, FEMA funding should not be one of those things that we are debating about, because, you know, when we had a disaster in Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, you have people saying, like, well, should we rebuild New Orleans? Should we rebuild Joplin, Missouri? We have an obligation as Americans to be able to help other Americans who are in need in a situation like this, when they are in that need at no fault of their own, but just because a natural disaster has befallen their area. So I have no problem with them finding budget cuts, by the way, to pay for some of this stuff. Remember, my objection was that the budget cuts had to come first. And the implication was that no money would come until they agreed. You know, if we're waiting for those guys to agree on anything, we'll be waiting for a long time. And folks here can't wait. And that was my point. So I never felt the need to make any phone calls, Ginger. I kind of thought my message was received pretty loud and clear. Yeah, Terry.
Sorry for having a little bit not related necessarily to Irene. The super committee in Washington is weighing what they're going to be doing. They're all eyes are now turning there. Do you have any concern that any action they take will sort of flow downhill to pushing the federal government's back?
We all have the same problems, Terry. And so, you know, we're all going to have to be in this together. Fact is that the federal government has an enormous debt and deficit problem that they have to deal with. They have to deal with responsibly, and they have to deal with by cutting spending. And, of course, it's going to affect everybody. The same way the cuts that we've made here in New Jersey affect everybody. But I will tell you, you know, I spent a good amount of time on Sunday evening on the Seaside Heights Boardwalk with my family, and I had any number of folks come up to me and say, you know, the fact that you're making the government smaller. And I think folks understand this. They don't necessarily like the particular cuts, especially if it's to a program they benefit from. But all they're looking for is fundamental fairness. And so I think that the way everyone who operates in this process should be guided is that there has to be shared sacrifice. There has to be fundamental, both the reality and the perception of fundamental fairness in the way we get out of this problem. But no one can be spared from the pain of the overspending and over-borrowing and over-taxing of our government under Republicans and Democrats over the last number of years, both at the federal level and at the state level. So am I concerned? Listen, I'll deal with whatever comes. I'd be much more concerned if they decide not to fix the problem, because that's going to be destructive for my children and my grandchildren if they don't. Yeah.
I spoke with Senator Mendez and they said they feel like they're looking at a new FEMA operating, one that's moving more smoothly than previous disasters. Have you ever thought on that? Do you think you're looking at a newer, more smoothly operating FEMA?
Well, I didn't operate with the old FEMA, so I don't have a point of reference. But what I would say is that Craig Fugate has been, the administrator of FEMA, has been incredibly responsive. He has a great reputation from his time working for Governor Jeb Bush in Florida. And certainly from those years has a lot of experience in dealing with this. You could tell from talking to Craig that he's got a great deal of experience and great energy. And so I don't have a point of reference, old FEMA versus new FEMA. And to me, candidly, to me, it's irrelevant. It's working well. And I've said that publicly any number of times. And the credit goes to the people who are doing it. So the credit first goes to the President of the United States for putting the right people in place who are obviously executing very well. It goes to Janet Napolitano. It's on her watch as Secretary of Homeland Security that this is happening. And it goes to Craig Fugate and folks like Bill Vogel and the folks who work for him. They deserve the credit, because you could be sure that those same fellas who are saying it's a new FEMA and it's a wonderful day, if things weren't going well, they'd be throwing the president, Fugate, Vogel, all under the bus. And so the fact is, if things are going well, they deserve the credit, because if they weren't going well, you could be sure they'd get the blame, whether they deserved it or not. So, you know, I think they deserve great credit, but I don't have a point of reference to the old FEMA. The FEMA I've worked with has been the FEMA in the Obama administration, and those folks, every time we've had to work with them, have done very, very well cooperative, coordinating, and responsive. Matt.
How did everything, FEMA did do the good job so far? How did all the other agencies and entities work out, especially in the course of the hurricane, the aftermath, from the utilities and getting the power back, and the AM agencies? How did you rate the performance?
Yeah, I think the performance was really outstanding. I mean, and listen, I think that most of the utilities did really well. Now, I think there's obvious concerns about JCP&L. I've said that before. I don't know what the reason is for their response being so much slower. I've heard what they've said, that they had more flooded areas. That's not true. They didn't have more flooded areas. Okay, so that explanation is not going to wash with me. So, but I don't want to prejudge it. Okay, I think that the numbers are obvious that PSE&G and Atlantic City Electric did a much better job than JCP&L did. They just did, by the numbers. Now, what we have the BPU for, and what President Solomon's going to figure out, is why. Is it a reason that was outside of JCP&L's control, or its parent, First Energy in Ohio, or is it something that was inside of their control? And I, from my perspective, and I don't know how President Solomon's going to do this. It's up to him to craft both his investigation and his hearings. But I would think it's not good enough just to hear from JCP&L. I think we have to hear from First Energy, from the parent as well. What resources did they give from around the country to come here? They knew it was coming. They knew it was going to be real bad here. So I think other than that one blip, for the rest of it, I think you heard mostly really, really good things. Maybe food was a little late getting one place one night. But I mean, given that we were moving tens of thousands of people into shelters, given that we were moving 1 million plus people off the Jersey Shore, transportation worked extraordinarily well. DEP was advising everybody how to keep out of harm's way and stay safe. The folks at Human Services were working with Homeland Security on the sheltering issues very well. The National Guard was incredibly responsive. I mean, my order to call up 2,000 guardsmen was executed on in a little more than 24 hours. We had 2,000 men and women soldiers in uniform out there doing things. And the state police running OEM did an outstanding job in coordinating all of it with the county and local officials. So, there were some glitches in the JCP&L situation is one we need to get to the bottom of. But other than that, I think things went very, very well. I think you talk to most people, they would agree with that, who dealt with it on the ground. Max.
Governor, do you anticipate being as engaged in congressional redistricting? They had their first meeting today, as you were in legislative redistricting?
If I feel I need to be, sure. My view on legislative redistricting was that my advice was being sought, and I'm not one of these guys who's going to hide behind the curtain, and give hand signals. So they needed me down there. They wanted my advice. They wanted my opinion. I went down there and gave it to them. And same thing on congressional. The folks who I have great confidence, as I did with the last group, in the folks that we've appointed to the Congressional Redistricting Commission. But I'll leave it up to them. If folks like Duhane pick up the phone and call me and say, Governor, we could use your advice down here, come meet with us. As long as my schedule permits, I'll come. Again, as I said in the legislative redistricting, I'm the leader of my party. And so I would assume that, if they want my advice and my counsel, that they'll ask for it. And if they do, as long as I can get there, I'll give it to them. Yeah.
Once you lost that map, did you decide that the strategy of this cycle, which began today, officially post-Labor Day, would be not winning a majority, but maybe something else like party voting, for example, finding key races where you could look for the future?
You mean in the legislative races? Well, listen, I've always said that winning back a Republican majority in the legislature was going to be a process. Now I hope that we're able to win it back this fall. And I'm going to work hard to try to make sure we win it back this fall. But, the Democrats have been in control of the legislature for 10 years. So I don't think you necessarily should expect that we're going to turn that around in 2 years. If we do, that's going to be a heck of a story. Now, if we don't, I would hope my goal this year, at a minimum, is to make gains. And if we make gains in the legislature, I'll be happy that happened. And I'll work hard to try to make sure that we do. But, remember, there's still 700,000 more registered Democrats in the state than Republicans. So let's never forget that little tidbit of information. It's significant. Yes, sir.
slightly off topic.
Sure.
Regarding Morris Bailey's